Welcome to the last afternoon of the event. As everybody knows by now, that I'm Ron Belknap, the President and CEO of Protocam, and you heard all about Protocam and what we do. And I do want to encourage anybody that has a need for more information to stop at our Allentown facility, give us a call, and come down and we'll give you a tour. And if nothing else, we can direct you in the right direction. We have access to all the technologies that we're talking about here, the plastics and the metals, and if we don't have it in-house, we have access to it, and we can provide that service for you. And as I said earlier, the biggest service we'll provide for you is we'll direct you in the right direction, because more than not, information you've read about is sales type stuff, but we'll give the real world information. And like Ed just finished up talking about post processing, and we can show that to you when you come down to our facility. And we would love to have you down, and if nothing else, for a tour, and make sure that you are utilizing the proper technology, because if you have a bad experience, you may get turned off by the technology, and that's not what we want. There's such a potential here, and that's why this is such a great program. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Her talk is about enhancing Pennsylvania's competitive advantage in the 21st energy economy. She is the Special Assistant to the Secretary, Strategic Industry Initiatives, and she is with the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, better known as the DCED. Please welcome Denise Brindley.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that kind introduction. And on behalf of Governor Wolf and Secretary Dennis Davin, I'd like to thank Ben Franklin Technology Partners and TecBridge and Wilkes University for the kind invitation to speak today. I hope that you've enjoyed the last day and a half of conference activities. I'm told through numerous people that it's been a really great collaborative conference, and there have been a lot of questions. So my intent is to speak as long as possible so that I leave just a little window, because some of you have already alerted you might have questions on the budget, and I'm sad to report I don't know that I can offer much there. From my reading materials on the conference, you've really had a diverse and exciting agenda that spans both industrial applications and career opportunities in additive manufacturing. So I always like to start really understanding who's in the audience today, because I can read an agenda just like anybody else, but I think it's all about the people that are in the room and how you're collaborating that's of most interest to me. So if I may ask just a couple of general questions, how many of you here today are representing industry? Okay. And how many represent either students, academic, or education? Oh, this is a great collaboration right here. Any economic developers? Great. And lifelong learners? I saw that on the agenda. I thought that was the greatest way to sell a conference, so kudos to whoever came up with that idea, because this is the way we get things done, is to continue to advance our knowledge in the fields that we like to be in. So geography-wise, how many of you are from Northeast Pennsylvania? Okay, and how about outside of Northeast Pennsylvania, but still in Pennsylvania? Okay, and then how about outside of Pennsylvania? And any international? Wow, so you can call this an international conference next year. So this is great. This is a great, great collaboration here today. How many of you are familiar with what the Department of Community and Economic Development does? Okay, well, I'm going to guess that's about 50%. My role at DCED is to promote strategic initiatives, including energy and advanced manufacturing. So I'm pretty sure that I'm at the right conference today, so that gives me a good pause. And our agency is really geared towards helping communities and economies thrive. I'll get a little bit more into that throughout the context of this particular talk, but we look at ways to help communities and help economies, and hopefully that happens at the same time. I should mention for context that my background is strongly environmental. Some of you know me from a different time in my career. So I plan to rely on that today to make some real world 20,000 foot view connections to the field of advanced manufacturing. My goal really is to foster connections and help you think with a much wider lens than perhaps you have in the last day and a half. And to realize how Northeast PA can participate in a rapidly growing field and receive all of the net positive benefits of economic growth. We are, after all, and I say this in many speeches, a state of enormous consequence in manufacturing. It is in our roots. We've been manufacturing in Pennsylvania for as long as I can remember and long before that. It is, simply put, our past, our present, and our future. At the same time that we're growing the manufacturing industry in new directions, we're actually making some serious advances in sustainable manufacturing by doing that. And that has a direct impact on climate. And I'm sure that a lot of you in this room don't think about that on a day-to-day basis, but I want to make those connections for you today because there's much bigger consequences to the way in which manufacturing is advancing. 4 key areas I would like to address today, and they're all going to weave together, I promise. By the end, hopefully you'll see the vision. Partnerships, STEM education, energy, and sustainability. These all play a role in, they support the growth of, and are net positive outcomes of additive manufacturing. I'll start with partnerships, which are vital, in my mind, to helping launch and ultimately sustain a new industry. Additive manufacturing sits at the nexus of research and development, innovation, and 21st century manufacturing. As you know better than I do, this is a whole new way of producing materials for a wide variety of applications. And it truly is the future of manufacturing, not just here in Northeast PA, not just in Pennsylvania, not just in the country, but also in the globe. But we need to move from technology integration to broad manufacturing solutions. And this can only be done through partnerships that span both the public and the private sectors, bridging the gap among academics, government, technology, and industry. And I think we established early on that all 4 of those are represented here today. I think we can do this by relying on our colleges and universities who conduct research, finding ways to incentivize those research and development activities that are so important to innovation, leveraging our public sector dollars, both state and federal, to support economic growth, and connecting innovation companies to industrial end users. In government, we play a role as your partner in supporting and helping new industries thrive at the local and regional level. I think everything in Pennsylvania starts local, or at least regional. We're here to support that process. We do that through technical support, we do that through capacity building, connection making, marketing, and finally, of course, funding. I'd like to segue to STEM for a few minutes, if I could. I take personal interest in promoting the value of STEM in any opportunity that I can. I'm a hydrogeologist by training. I know, I'm the only one at DCD with that actual background, so, but they still took me in. I learned a lot in my early career about soil and groundwater contamination and how to define it and how to clean it up. This happened in the 80s at the closure of certain types of manufacturing activities, like mainframes at IBM. As part of that process, I learned to clean up contaminated properties and move them from what we would call a mothballed status, shuttered plants, closed plants, chain link fence, nothing happening in the building, to actually new development and new job opportunities. Many of them, by the way, were the old ways of manufacturing. But science, technology, engineering, and math, we need more young people trained in those fields. We need them for a pipeline of jobs to the future. There's a certain critical way of thinking that is taught as part of STEM, And whether a young person goes into STEM and ends up not doing anything in STEM, they still have a way of thinking that's critical to the way we make decisions, especially in public policy, by the way. So if there are students out there, I'm asking you to trust me that STEM education pays dividends. The future of additive manufacturing will depend on people trained in those critical fields. In order to grow the industry, we have to have the talented pool to feed it. And certainly, NEPA has the abundance of educational institutions in this area to play a significant role in that. So I'm going to move to energy, which might seem discordant, but I promise you I'm going to bring it all together. I'll start with a little bit of background on energy, just to set the stage. Pennsylvania is an energy state. In fact, I'd argue that we are the energy state in North America. We are a net exporter of energy, meaning we produce more than we actually use, and we send the rest to the other places along the grid. And that's within our PJM interconnected system. We send it northeast, we send it to the west, and we send it to the southeast. We have a diverse energy fleet, which I think is important to our history as being an energy state. We have coal. Everyone's seen the stories related to coal. Coal is a little bit on the downslide right now, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We have nuclear, we have natural gas opportunities, we have hydropower, and we have renewable through solar and wind. And we have had a major energy transformation in the last 15 years. So for those of you who don't think about energy on a day-to-day basis and look at it as a way to be an economy driver, what I'm about to tell you is something that you will not see again in your lifetime. A 22% decline in coal supplanted by a 22% increase in natural gas. That is a significant energy transformation, and it happened just like that. We've had a little under 10,000 wells drilled in the Commonwealth since 2007, and right now $10 billion of pipeline infrastructure projects are being planned. For those of you who live in this area, two of the biggest ones that you may have name recognition for are the Penn East Pipeline and the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline. Has anyone heard of those in the news? Maybe? Yes. So what are we going to do with all that gas? The story right now, and the message that DCD has been delivering all over the Commonwealth, and I know Kevin O'Donnell heard me say this a couple weeks ago, is that not very much of it is actually planned for Pennsylvania. The transmission lines that are being built are intending to take that natural gas to the markets that are going to pay the most for it. And that includes the Northeast, it includes the Southeast, and it could potentially include exporting abroad. So the governor and DCD are working to promote the use of natural gas here in Pennsylvania. What does that mean to additive manufacturing? A couple of things. There could be natural gas derivatives that are produced here in PA that could be used as part of an additive manufacturing process, mostly plastics. Natural gas byproducts are the building blocks of the plastics industry. We can also use the gas to produce electricity that's needed for the actual manufacturing process. So these are two simple ways that we're thinking about how to use this gas and how it could be related to what we're all talking about here today. So our focus right now, laser beam, is get the gas to market, but do it in a way that creates as many off-ramps to end users as we can, using the gas right here in PA and moving Pennsylvania from just a producer to an actual user. So that's our strategy from a high level. But I'd argue that we need to have longer range, bigger thinking prospects for all of this gas. And that's why I'm going to move into just a brief discussion about sustainability and climate change, because there's a link to additive manufacturing in those two topics as well. Safe to say, I believe, that global temperatures are rising. We can argue about why, but they are indeed increasing. The majority of people care about climate, It has generational impacts. And I know I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I want them to have just as beautiful as an environment as we have now, if not better, when they're my age. It's not just people as a society, it's actually companies are starting to look at their own carbon footprints. It's starting to kind of become more of a society-based issue. And the private sector is beginning to drive some of this dialogue in the way in which they invest and they run their business. And I think that's important as a group of economic developers or an industry to understand that companies do care what their carbon footprint is, because they get money from financial markets who care what their carbon footprint is. So it is somewhat driven by money, but at the end of the day, it can be a good thing. It's not just about profit anymore for companies, it's about people and planet. So how does additive manufacturing fit into this particular topic? In general, additive manufacturing uses less energy. So if you use less energy, you're less reliant on fossil fuels. And in some cases, it's up to 50% less energy than traditional manufacturing techniques. That's significant. It also uses less material. There's less waste to deal with. That also has an impact on sustainability and ultimately climate, because you're needing less raw materials in the process. Additive manufacturing is removing transportation barriers because products can be made right on site and very close to the source. So you don't need the logistical setup in some cases to get those products further along to the market. If you combine the additive manufacturing process with our abundant natural gas and our renewable market, there's some very significant forward momentum. And this is not just me saying this, because I actually have a great example of this, which is somewhat in its test phases, but presents a really exciting option for additive manufacturing. At Oak Ridge National Laboratory, they introduced a project last year where they made a vehicle and a home through 3D printing. And they linked them together through integrated energy. So they built, through 3D printing, a natural gas-powered hybrid vehicle, and they connected it to a 210 square foot solar-powered home. It's not a very big home. 210 feet is small. But I don't know how many of you have seen Little Houses on HGTV, where, there seems to be a trend for this, so, maybe for the millennials, this is a good idea. So it's a fully integrated energy system. If the solar cells aren't working at the house because of no sun, they can use the natural gas engine in the vehicle to provide the home with supplemental power. And if the batteries in the hybrid vehicle can be charged from the solar power in the home. This is what's called an off-the-grid solution. It's not going to be impacted by emergencies. It's not going to be impacted by extreme weather events that bring the grid down. And it's not going to be impacted by natural disasters, unless the natural disaster happens right on the property. So I think what this project demonstrates, even though it's in its testing phase, are the cornerstones of what I started this talk with. The first is partnerships. It took the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and DOE at the federal level and 20 private businesses and educational organizations to put this project together. That requires STEM. It requires people who understand STEM. It addresses in many ways our over-reliance on fossil fuels. It brings reliable and stable energy sources. And this is sort of a side thought, but there's some belief that projects like this can actually help developing nations develop overnight. You can provide them with homes and vehicles. You don't need an energy transmission structure to help a country grow. You do it by homegrown, distributed energy from one site to another. And finally, it represents the sustainable future of green energy and modern manufacturing. So I'm going to stop talking at this point and really open the floor to questions. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. And I'll say personally that when Ken and I talked, I said, you know, Ken, I'm not an additive manufacturing expert. I'm really going to do my best to try and weave together a lot of different concepts to bring up for you how you're playing a role in society and in industry and in manufacturing. So I hope that I have achieved that for you. Thank you. Oh, I've silenced everyone. That's not good. I heard everyone here had lots of questions and
Maybe an obvious question, but why is it important for our energy to be used in the state? Just curious.
there's a lot of different ways to answer that. I'll answer it from DCED's optic. If we transport gas simply to our adjoining markets, like Boston or along the southern seaboard, we are giving inexpensive gas to our neighbors who will compete with us in manufacturing. And if we're not using it here, we're not getting the same derived benefits of inexpensive natural gas in the state.
Thank you, Rodney. I had a question, actually. You said you're a hydrogeologist. I was wondering what that actually is and how you decided on that. I'm actually curious. That's a very unique selection.
Okay, so I have to go back a couple decades, but you know, I went to college thinking I was going to be a German government double major and focus on international politics. And I met a professor who actually ended up playing a profound influence in my life, and we are still close and we still talk to each other. And she happened to be a woman, so women in geology. At the time I went through college, I was one of two out of the entire geology department. She just captured my intrigue and interest in environmental issues and helped steer me appropriately into, I have a geology major, but I ended up going into the subfield of hydrogeology just because I wanted to clean up groundwater from old industrial operations, and that seemed like a good fit. So really it had to do with those who influence you when you're young and who play a role as teachers and as professors and who kind of show you different ways of thinking. That's the primary reason. And then I ended up loving it, so.
Hi, you mentioned clean energy as part of the manufacturing process. I'm curious, does the DCED leverage the Clean Energy Manufacturing Analysis Center as part of the DOE? They're under the National Renewable Energy Laboratories.
So our DOE, I think what you're asking about is where our DOE funding goes and how we leverage that at the state, and maybe?
Yeah, partially, not just the funding piece, but the Analysis Center offers tools as well to determine to convince policymakers and industry and whatnot to transition to renewable energy.
Okay, so I do understand your question, and I'm going to answer that with the fact that for many years the DOE relationship with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has been with the Department of Environmental Protection. And we haven't done the best at making it both an economic and an environmental proposition. And so with this administration, we're trying to change that. And so our agency is now becoming directly involved in the discussion and the working collaboration with DOE. So stay tuned, because we're not together yet. But that is one of the missions of having a focus on energy in DCED, is because we recognize that there's a strong economic driver in addition to the great environmental benefits that you get out of it, and we have to start articulating that.
So Denise, Don Webster again. So first of all, thank you for recognizing the collaboration at the beginning of this conference with the way you pointed that out. I think it's one of the things that people are really excited about and proud of, and in terms of how we put this together and the participation and the conversation that's going on. Could you talk a little bit about your travels around the state and a couple of the examples maybe that you're seeing outside of Northeast Pennsylvania that you really like, and why you like it from a DCED perspective, so that this group can go, oh, maybe we should be doing that here? Is there anything in the state that you like in terms of collaboration that really stands out for you?
There's a lot of things. I want to make sure I focus it sort of into additive manufacturing, but
You don't have to, though. I mean, it can be additive manufacturing, but I think the spirit of this conference was collaboration and networking and learning around the topic of additive manufacturing. But I'm just curious, if in the rest of the state, if there are some particularly good collaboration things that you see. I'd love to know what your favorites are.
One of the best ones that I've been involved with personally is in Berks County. There's an old industrial site that is next to an airport, and for whatever reason, they cannot connect to the transmission lines for electricity without a huge expense. So I want to say, I'm just throwing out numbers. It's like $6 or $8 million to get a transmission line to the park. I don't know why. We're all still learning about that. But there's been a very large table that's been constructed, and that includes Penn State, Berks County. It includes the Department of Energy. It includes private solar developers, some folks interested in combined heat and power. ESRI, if you've heard of ESRI. Local officials, people on the Berks County Industrial Development Authority. The state is there at the table, and the discussion is centering around how to develop a microgrid to power the potential end users at the site. It's a huge collaboration. To get a microgrid going is really difficult, because you got to cobble together funding, you have to figure out how to get around the PUC, you have to find somebody to run the microgrid, who's going to own it, how much power do we need, how does it need to be put together. It's technical, it's political, it's funding. So that's one great example. I do think they're going to get there. It does go to show, though, how long sometimes it takes from the inception of an idea to actual construction of something real. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 years there. Some other good working collaborations that I've seen have been in the Pittsburgh region. So the University of Pitt has opened an energy innovation center at the old Connolly Trade School. And they are weaving in companies like, for example, Pitt, Ohio, who's a trucking manufacturer. They built nice bays and a really nice new distribution center that's entirely microgrid technology. They have solar, they have wind, they have compressed natural gas for the vehicles. It's all off the grid. And I guess where I'm going with this is a lot of this is being driven by companies that are conscious of the way in which they grow their business sustainably. And I think when you have the right mix of public-private partnerships, and you have folks who want to do the right thing, and then you have government and economic development and universities wrapping around that to help them, those are some of the best ways to get things done. You have to have the right private sector partners.
All right, I think that's time. One more, okay, great.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to compliment you on your presentation, and also the fact that you brought up a very salient point. You brought up the idea that the net export of our gas was really a competitive issue that we need to address, because our adjoining states or other regions will be competing against us with lower energy costs. So the question I have, and the concern I have, is because with the coal industry, wealth left this area. We had the resources, but wealth was generated from another area. What is the state doing specifically to address the infrastructure requirements to bring natural gas to industry and communities throughout Pennsylvania? So that's a specific question as to what infrastructure activities and what kind of promotion are you going to do at the state level at this point to bring that infrastructure? Because without the infrastructure, obviously, we won't have the natural gas. Thank you.
That's a great question. Kevin would like to answer. I think, number one, the governor proposed in his original budget, going back to 2015, funding for last mile pipeline construction to recognize that very point, which is transmission lines are going to be built. There's billions of dollars going into that, and it's all going somewhere else. But what we need is lines that connect to transmission or connect to the local distribution companies so that they can bring that gas then to market. Just for your own knowledge, I mean, I have a gas line running right next to my house, and the builders 20 years ago got a great deal on electrical equipment for my home apparently and other people's homes, and they never connected to the gas, so I'm stuck with electric even though the gas line is right there. So it's a significant cost for a homeowner to just like upgrade, even if the gas line's going right in front of your house. So going back to your original question, you know, the governor has wanted this type of funding. There is $12 million in this last fiscal code to initiate some form of last mile funding. That's not going to be enough. So we need to keep pushing for more funding. But what helps with the push for funding is having projects that are identified and costs ascertained as to what the capital outlay will be to get gas to wherever they're going. So CEDACOG, I always like to talk about, you asked about who's doing great things. CEDACOG went and did a regional gas utilization study in 11 counties. Really a beautiful way to approach it. Very methodical, very straightforward. Where are the gas lines, first of all? That can be a tough question to answer, by the way. Where are the gas lines? And how close are the existing gas lines to new centers of use? And then we're going to prioritize across an 11 county region where we think the best bang for our buck is to get gas to manufacturers, to get gas to homes, to get gas to businesses. And they're just kicking off the first phase of their study, which is 3 counties out of the 11. And by the way, all 3 counties agreed on the first project. Think about that. A county, 2 other counties agreed that the first project should be in another county. So that is progress. I don't know how you define progress any better than that. But you know, they're maximizing they may actually even form a natural gas co-op, which would get them out of the local distribution company quagmire, so to speak. I'm sure Kevin would appreciate I called it a quagmire. So.
Well, let's thank our speaker once again. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.